Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Conflict at Your Association, You Don't Say. This webinar is sponsored by Association Reserves, Inc. and Richardson Harmon Ober, a professional law corporation. My name is Paige Daniels and I'm the Marketing Manager for Association Reserves. I'll be serving as your moderator for today. Conflict at Your Association, You Don't Say is a 45-minute webinar that arose from ongoing conversations from two friends and experts in the community association field, Robert Nordland from Association Reserves and attorney Kelly Richardson from Richardson Harmon Ober. This webinar is approved by the Community Association Managers International Certification Board, CAMICB, for CE credit related to the CMCA certification. Robert and Kelly presented a well-received version of this webinar last year and have updated it for today's presentation. In another year of working with community associations, Robert and Kelly realized there were some different ways to articulate these issues and help boards minimize conflict. The goal is to help boards and owners live peacefully and productively in their community associations and give managers some insights that will reduce the stress of their jobs. Conflict is an unnecessary and undesirable distraction in community association life. In Kelly's law practice, he sees many of the same mistakes and misunderstandings over and over again. Similarly, Robert sees associations making the same financial mistakes over and over again. Due to volunteer leadership and humans acting like humans, most associations find themselves in some level of continual organizational or financial conflict. But the good news is that these stress points can be identified and significantly reduced. So sit back and get ready to pick up some good ideas to apply to your life at your association. Due to the number of people attending, everyone has been muted. You can ask questions at any time by typing your question into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. We'll start our Q&A time at the end with some questions that have been emailed in, so type your questions and we'll get to as many as time allows. Now, before I introduce our speaker, and while we're waiting for everyone to get logged in and settled, we'd like to get to know our audience a little better with 3 quick polls. The first one being, have you heard Robert or Kelly speak before? Please go ahead and make your selection. Okay, great. It looks like quite a few of you have, but we do have a lot of newbies with us today as well. So welcome to everyone. The next question is, what is your role in the world of association governed communities? Please go ahead and make your selection. Okay, great. Oh, wow. I don't know that I've ever seen that before. Pretty exact even split between board members on site and portfolio managers, but good representing in each category. Okay, and then the final poll is, have you ever attended one of our webinars before? Please go ahead and make your selection. Okay, and it looks like, again, a lot of return attendees, but a lot of new ones as well. All right, thank you all for participating in the polls. Now it's time to introduce our 2 speakers. Robert Nordland is the founder and CEO of Association Reserves and a certified reserve specialist. Association Reserves has prepared over 45,000 reserve studies for associations in all 50 states over the last 30 years. He regularly writes on the topic of reserve studies and speaks at industry functions throughout the nation. Robert leads our corporate office in Calabasas, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, and supervises technical standards through our network of 12 Association Reserves regional offices. Kelly Richardson is co-founder and managing partner of Richardson Harmon Ober, a law firm with its headquarters in Pasadena, California. Kelly has been serving the growing community housing sector throughout California for over 28 years and has been an influential voice on community association issues in California and on a national level. He has received numerous awards as an attorney, writes a column that appears in 14 newspapers, was past president of the Greater Los Angeles chapter of the Community Associations Institute, also known as CAI, has served 7 years as a national trustee of CAI and was CAI's 2016 national president. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Robert Norland. Robert?
Well, thank you, Paige, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Hey, Kelly, can I get you to say hello?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for signing in today.
Well, Kelly and I have known each other for a couple of decades now, and I've always respected Kelly's experience and expertise in the field. You heard Paige rattle off his accomplishments, and indeed we see Kelly quite regularly on a national level leading the community association industry. But in addition, Kelly and I have a heart for fixing things, and maybe that's why we volunteer in CAI and some other things like that, trying to make things better. And we both get a great deal of pleasure when association leaders reach that aha moment when they can eliminate mistakes or conflicts or stress points, things that have been bogging down their association or distracting them from the business at hand. And there is a lot of business to do in running an association. When I was thinking about this webinar, getting prepared, I was thinking not so much about what I'm going to do today for educational purposes. I was thinking more like the lessons that I've had playing racquetball from a pro, and the golf lessons I've had from a pro that helped me do things better, that really give me pleasure, that help me execute well, that make my quality of life improve. And so that's what we're going to try to do today, identify these root causes of stress and let us today be your pro or your coach, showing you some adjustments you can make so that we can improve your quality of life working with associations, because there is a better way. We are, as Paige indicated, doing this today for continuing education credit, and I compliment Paige on getting through those acronyms. So for those of you, I hope this is not only good for your credits, but good for lowering the stress and improving your quality of life in the associations that you deal with professionally. Kelly's going to start out sharing a few of his insights, but first I want to remind you that if any time you have a question for one of us, you can simply type that question into the dialog box. It will appear similar to what you see on screen. Kelly and I both enjoy speaking to a live audience. It's fun to do that. We can't see you today, so if at any time we have a question for you, we'll ask you to raise your hands, and you can do that by clicking the hands raised icon in your control panel. Again, it looks kind of like this that you see on screen. So let's practice that. Grab your mouse and give me a hands raised if you're ready to hear from Kelly. Hands raised, everyone. Find that hands raised icon. Very nice. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to put all your hands down. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn the floor over to Kelly.
Thank you, Robert, and thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. I realized that since you're all attending online that I can't see if you're making funny faces and gestures at Robert and I, but just remember this during the webinar, that you also can't see what faces or gestures we're making towards you. So, you know, it goes both ways. But seriously, folks, the issue of conflict, of all the things that we lawyers deal with, that's troubling and expensive and damaging and sometimes scarring to communities, is conflict that begins with disagreement and then turns into destructive and relationship tearing conflict. And I think that we lawyers talk about how to deal with, how to resolve with conflict, how to respond to it all the time. We talk about lawsuits and ADR and attorney's fees claims and all these different motions to deal with the conflict. But it's kind of like talking about a forest fire after the hills were already ablaze. The damage is happening. I think that just as when you're gardening, you don't just pull the weeds, you try to do things to make your yard less likely to have weeds. You don't just pull the leaves of the weeds, you reach down and you dig the weeds out by the roots. And by the same token, I think that's really what Robert and I would like to try to do with you today, is to not just talk about the problem of conflict. We all know the problem, but how do we start recognizing disagreement and the root causes and contributors to conflict, and see if we can head off the fire before it starts, before the hill is ablaze. So that's really what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about the roots and sources of conflict. And remember, conflict is not disagreement. Disagreement is healthy. Disagreement is normal. In fact, you're not going to have conflict without a disagreement first as the beginning point. It's when that disagreement becomes unpleasant, destructive, damaging, hurtful, then we call it conflict. So as we talk about conflict and dealing with homeowners, it's interesting, we've got about a 2/3 to 1/3 split of managers to homeowners on the seminar this afternoon. But all of us look at our role in the community association, and we have several roles, don't we, board members and managers? Sometimes you feel like you're the judge and the jury, but then you're also the enforcers. You have to report things and make complaints and feel like you're the darn police or SWAT team. And then you're also asked to be the executioner and to carry out the sentences of the association. And that doesn't sound like fun. That's not something that we all want to sign up for or volunteer, and I'm sure managers don't get any joy out of this aspect of it. But there's really a different role that I want to suggest today, that both board members, managers, and even attorneys, that we take a different role as educators. That we're obviously dealing with volunteers, we're dealing with people that most of the time haven't had any training, they haven't gone to CAI to take classes or gone to seminars to learn how to do this. So this is all volunteer work on top of their day jobs. And we have turnover in boards, don't we? We have all the time, we have new people coming in, hopefully. And so a lot of times, one of the best things we can do for the association volunteers is to remember that the first step is conveying knowledge and conveying information, giving people healthy assumptions and foundations. Well, let's talk about some unhealthy assumptions that will hinder us right away as we deal with people who are on the other side of a disagreement. Now again, all conflict is going to start first with some kind of a disagreement. When we're dealing with somebody who is disagreeing with us as manager, as board member, as lawyer, do we automatically go to the assumption that that person is evil, spiteful, that they wish nothing but harm, their motivations are bad? Why is that fair? And we do it not just in the association, we do it on the national level. How many of us, regardless of your place in the political spectrum, how many of us have heard people say over the last 8, 10, 12 years that whoever the current president is trying to destroy America, or that he hates America, or isn't trying to promote America's best interests? How is that fair? Well, it obviously isn't. To assume that somebody's trying to tear down the association, tear down the country or the state or county. Well, it's just as illogical to assume somebody is evil out of the gate as it is to assume that that person is saintly and that everything they say is truth and gospel and light. The truth, of course, is somewhere in the middle, that everybody has their stuff. They have good points and bad points. And I think you're going to start much more in a healthy position if you begin with the assumption that this person's seeing something different, believes something different than you believe and know, and don't be so quick to assume poor or even bad motivations. And one of the things that I'm going to say a couple of times in this session with you today is that knowledge deficit is very different from a decency deficit. A lot of times conflict starts because people just don't know. Sometimes directors, homeowners don't know. Heck, sometimes lawyers don't know the answer to the question, and they start off in the wrong direction. So if we don't recognize that there's a knowledge deficit in the average home buyer into a common interest community, we're right away setting ourselves up potentially for failure. One example is with exclusive use common area. In the condominium world, exclusive use common area, of course, is very, very widespread, right? The balconies, the back patios, the little yards, front porches. In a condominium, of course, the homeowner looks at exclusive use area and they stop at the word exclusive. It's my exclusive board. You can't tell me what to do with it. Well, hold on, homeowner, because the next word is use. It's for your exclusive use. but the next two words remind us that it's still common area. So many homeowners come into an association, and by the way, some board members don't even understand that it may be exclusive use common area, but it is still under association jurisdiction. It's not my balcony. It's not my patio. It's our patio because it's common area. And remember that most of the time, the definition of the real estate interest that people separately own, the definition of the unit, typically doesn't even come from the CC&Rs. It comes from a recorded document called the condo plan. And in probably 98 to 99% of condos, the condominium is defined as the airspace surrounded by the unfinished surfaces of the walls, floor, ceilings. So that means that everything outside that block of airspace, such as the framing in the walls, the floor underneath the carpet, the patios, the front door, the balconies, that's exclusive use common area. And I can almost guarantee you that particularly with the first-time condominium buyer, nobody told them that. So right away you've got people assuming that it's, quote, theirs, and it's our job as lawyers, managers, and directors to be compassionate and patient and explain to them that this is not your ownership, it's your use, and we, the association, control it for the benefit of everybody else in the community. Another issue that's a problem is client expectations, homeowner expectations of attached housing. Now this is an area where frankly the real estate market and the economics have outstripped our cultural adaptations. And by that what I mean is that many of you are aware that in terms of new housing projects, that at least in the Western United States, new housing is almost certainly going to be in some form of a common interest community, typically a planned development or a condominium. More and more cities, such as Pasadena, where I'm today, all kinds of infill projects where we're increasing density, building condominiums. Well, so the real estate and economic market is very comfortable with it. The cities and counties are very comfortable with it. But the problem is that culturally, we Americans have not caught up with the change in the real estate market. The whole common interest community concept as a widespread animal is only a little more than 40 years old. And one of the phenomena that we deal with is that we've got homeowners who are thinking that I'm buying into this community, but it's still my castle, it's my home, and you all can't tell me what to do with it. And it's that aspect of the culture that sets up right away friction between what makes the shared ownership concept work, which is of course shared ownership, shared control, shared responsibility, and some reduction in independence and autonomy for the benefits that come with giving up that independence. Well, not everybody recognizes that when they move into a community. And so one of the things that we lawyers and managers and directors need to remember is that we're still fighting this cultural battle, that Americans were very independent. We like to refer to our castle, and it's just not necessarily really that way. One of the other things that's a problem with apartment-style condominiums, and by apartment-style I mean condominiums where people live over and under each other. When you have attached housing, people don't understand when they buy that that condominium is an apartment, that the paperwork has been changed in such a way so that you can sell the apartment. The building code, at least in California where I am, doesn't differentiate between condos and apartments in terms of how they're built. So the soundproofing is going to be pretty much the same. If in your fourth floor apartment in Burbank, you heard a little bit of footfall noise from time to time, or you heard people out in the hallway in your apartment building, well, you know what? In that fourth floor condominium in Pomona, you're going to hear some footfalls from time to time. You're going to hear maybe some plumbing noise above you because it's an apartment that you purchased. So some of these expectations are not really very always accurate when people buy into a common interest community. Another issue involves governing documents, and here I think we'd like to send a poll to you about what is your experience or observation involving governing documents. Paige, could I throw it back to you for a second?
Absolutely. All right, here is the poll. Do you experience stress due to ignorance of governing docs or use restrictions? Please go ahead and make your selection. All right, Kelly, it looks like 88% are saying they do experience stress.
And 9% of you are truly blessed. Well, governing documents are something that, unfortunately, the average homeowner looks at as boilerplate. When we buy a car or an appliance, some of us do our research in advance. We look and see, okay, what exactly comes with this car? How does this car work? What mileage does it get? And of course, what's the price? When we buy an appliance, well, sometimes we aren't quite that careful, right? We like a particular brand, we buy it, and then we get all this literature about the product. And well, we'll look at that sometime later if we have a problem. Sadly, my experience is that most homeowners buy a condo the same way they buy a toaster. Is that they look at the product, they see the price is right, they like the product, they buy it, and they don't take the trouble to read the paperwork that comes with it. Well, that works pretty well with a toaster because you just have to plug it in and make sure you remember where the bread goes. But that doesn't work with a common interest-community home because the CC&Rs in particular are contracts that bind the buyer every bit as much as a residential purchase agreement that they signed during escrow. And unfortunately, and I don't mean to criticize the real estate profession, but it's just a fact that the vast majority of real estate professionals are not telling home buyers that they must read the governing documents. By that I mean the covenants, the bylaws, and the rules and regulations of the association, that they're not telling the buyer to read all this before they close escrow. And so just the same as they bought a toaster, they go ahead and close escrow on that condominium or that planned development home, and a couple of months later, when they get a warning letter from the manager or the board, then they finally pull out the documents and say, wait a minute, is it really true that I can only have 2 dogs? What a disaster. If I have 3 show dogs and I buy a condominium on Wilshire Boulevard and I bring my 3 dogs in and I find out to my horror about 6 months after becoming a member of the association that the association has a rule as a restriction in the CC&R saying that I can only have a maximum of 2 dogs. That's a disaster for me. So it's an avoidable disaster, but we've got to encourage people to read the documents beforehand. Well, of course, we managers and directors and lawyers, we don't get these people before they become owners. So my point in all this is we need to recognize that probably the average homeowner hasn't looked at the governing documents, and the first time they learn about something that they're doing wrong is when the association alerts them to it. So guess what? There's going to be some resistance arising out of that ignorance. So again, we have to really check our attitudes and start with the assumption that for the most part, people didn't know. And that will help us be much more effective, compassionate, and professional, frankly, in dealing with that homeowner as we cite them to page 24 of the CC&Rs or page 6 of the association rules. Another issue in conflict is that a lot of times we really don't understand that we may not know what they know and they may not know what we know, and that different reality can make the world look to be completely different as well. Look at this old drawing or painting of the goes along with the old ancient parable of the monks, the blind monks that for the first time were exposed to an elephant. And depending upon which part of the elephant you were exposed to, dramatically affected what you described the elephant as. Some people who were feeling the leg of the elephant said, well, this is a mighty tree. Well, somebody else might have been feeling the tail, and they said, no, this is a very long snake. Somebody else was on the back of the elephant, had a completely different experience than the other monks. Are any of them telling the truth? Are any of them lying? No, they're not lying. They're simply describing what they knew. And so a lot of times, the first step before we escalate into a conflict is to make sure that everybody has the same information. And I think, again, when we take the trouble to make sure that we have the information, they have the information, that may help us get on the same page, literally and figuratively. Again, I want to close this particular section by saying again, that conflicts often begin with a knowledge deficit, not an integrity deficit. Now, another area that we can help reduce conflict and friction in associations is in really changing the way that we look at and the way we train people for their governance role in associations. And that means that sometimes we have to unlearn some things that we have learned. Your daytime experience as a worker in the world is very different from your volunteer experience in the association. So I often say that your day job is very different from your night job. And so let's look at the chain of command in your day job. In your day job, we've learned from really elementary school that there's always somebody who's our boss, right? We learned when we were kids that the boss is the school teacher. And we learned that there was a person over the school teacher that was their boss, and that person was the principal. And so whether we're in the military, we're in private enterprise, we're in education, whatever, we've always learned that there's somebody over us, and then there probably are people under us. Well, that chain of command is very different in the common interest community. In the night job, your chain of command completely changes. The chain of command is no longer a single person. It's a group. That group we call the board of directors. No longer do we have a single person who's the boss. We have a group who's the boss. And of course, that group acts in board meetings. And that's a really critical understanding, that boards act as a team sport. They don't act as an individual event. The very best football team, the very best basketball team or baseball team doesn't win with a single player. We've got this guy right now in the Dodgers, this kid's 20 years old. His name's Cody Bellinger. And he's I think, hit 20-some home runs already, and the kid's 20 years old, okay? He is a phenomenal player as we go to the next slide. He's a phenomenal player, and he's doing wonderful things for the Dodgers. But you know what? He still needs a pitcher to pitch the ball, and he still needs a catcher to catch the ball. He can't win by himself. In the common interest community world, it's exactly the same. Association work is a team sport, and no vote on that board is any more valuable than any other vote. And managers in particular, you really need to build that culture in your client boards. A lot of times you're going to have discouraged directors that feel like, well, my vote doesn't count because that person talks louder than me, or that person's the president. That's not true. Let's talk about the president. Let's look at some day job presidents. Well, of course, the most famous day job president is the President of the United States. Now, I got to tell you, this slide I've used for, 5-6 years, and I created it, obviously, when Mr. Obama was President of the United States. The guy on the right, I swear to you, I had no clue. This was from his TV show. Remember the TV show where his tagline was, "You're fired"? I can't believe here I am today, and this guy is the United States President. And I mean that not as a commentary on our current president, but just it's kind of funny that how things work out. But my point is the day job president is the boss, right? The president of the United States can make decisions about where military actions will happen. He can veto legislation, and so can those of us in private business. We can hire or fire vendors and make decisions because we're the boss, and we may have somebody over us who's our boss, but there's a single person. Well, the nonprofit president is completely different. The nonprofit president has really very little power. Very different from the day job president. The homeowner association president is not the boss. The HOA president calls the meeting, sets the agenda, chairs the meeting, but again is only one vote. Sometimes under the bylaws they'll have the power to appoint committees, but the point is that there's still a vote. And the boss in the HOA is not the president. The boss is the board of directors. A lot of times associations that wind up in deep dysfunction are because we've selected somebody as president who's a go-getter, a leader, a person who's action-oriented, very confident person. But see, some of those qualities can also be curses if that president doesn't understand that they're not the boss of the association, that they are one of 3, 5, 7, 9, or God help us, 11 votes on the board of directors. Yes, I've worked with 11-member boards. That's really interesting. Anyways, so a key point here is making sure that we have a president who understands what they are and understands what they are not. And I will tell you just a little side note here. A lot of HOA presidents look at their bylaws and see the section that says the president is the chief executive officer of the corporation and exercises the powers normally accorded to a president. Well, they think that that's a CEO of a for-profit corporation president. No, it's a very different role. So we need to rein in those presidents because we don't want the rest of the board discouraged, and we certainly don't want an HOA dictatorship. That doesn't work very well long term at all. The last thing I want to cover in the few minutes I have left is in terms of setting up a healthy association, making sure that it's in balance. We have to juggle the four worlds, the four major interests or aspect of every common interest community. And those are that a common interest community is simultaneously four different things. It's a corporation with legal interests and procedures that have to be followed, governing documents. It's a business, spending money, saving money, conserving money, accumulating money. It's a real estate project. We've got to make sure that things are maintained and repaired. We've got to preserve, protect, and maintain the common elements of the community, and we've got to make sure that the residences themselves have some architectural conformity to benefit everybody in terms of property values and appearance. And lastly, it's a community. It's a bunch of neighbors. And we need to balance, we need to adequately attend to each of the four characteristics of the common interest development, no matter how large or small it is. And if we keep this balanced, we're going to find that we're having an environment that's much less likely to have major dysfunction, major conflict. When I see associations in turmoil, recall after recall, people hiring lawyers, vicious, board meetings, people screaming at each other, it's almost always because people haven't got sufficient attention to each of these aspects. So just very briefly, let's talk about them for a moment. First of all, the corporate aspect. Now, of course, I as a lawyer, typically my colleagues, we talk about the corporate aspect all the time, right? We talk about the CCNRs and rules and following the governing documents and observing the corporate process. That's all critical. But it's not the only thing that matters, right? Sometimes we have to have flexibility. Sometimes we're going to warn a violator. We're not going to automatically fine them. Sometimes we're going to do things extra for the community, even though the law doesn't require it. Similarly, the business aspect. Some people say the bottom line is the bottom line. Well, that's not really necessarily true. In a few minutes, Robert's going to talk to us about true fiscal wisdom, but it's important that associations have reasonable budgets and that they collect all the assessments and spend the association's money wisely, accumulate it wisely. But that's not the only thing. Sometimes associations get in trouble because the board is so fixated on not spending money that they don't want to hire consultants and they don't want to keep required routine maintenance going because they're so desperately trying to hold the line on assessments. So there's balance there. Real estate project, we have to maintain things. We have to make sure that people take good care of their homes and that the association keeps the roofs on the building and what have you. That's obviously important. And lastly, and this is the thing that we lawyers just don't talk enough about, and that's we don't talk about that the association is still a community. It's bound together by covenants, yes, but people weren't forced to live there. They chose to live there, and they're your neighbors. So as you make decisions, managers, lawyers, directors, remember you're still dealing with neighbors. And so that is from time to time going to compel you to do things that you don't have to do, or maybe to refrain from doing something that you have a legal right to do in the interest of a harmonious community. For example, do you have to give people warnings before you fine them for a violation and have a hearing? No, you don't have to give them a warning. But is that a really good idea for the community? Well, of course it is. Do you have to have town hall meetings and newsletters to keep people updated about major projects and major developments affecting the community? No, you don't. But it's a really, really good idea. How you run your board meetings. We need to have legal process. We need to have order in the room. But we also need to make sure that we really pay close attention to the open forum part of the meeting, because that serves not only the law, but the community as people feel valued and listened to. So as I wrap up my part of this session, I just want to emphasize to you that before these problems break out, a lot of them can be prevented by thinking ahead and recognizing unhealthy attitudes, making sure people are properly educated. And when the association gets really in a dysfunction state, where the manager says, you know what, I don't know if this account is worth it anymore, or people on the board are saying, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, it's not worth it to me. Well, maybe it's because we need to step back and look and see where do we get out of balance. So another part of that balance is looking at the long-term financial health of the association. And Robert, I think you have some thoughts on that maybe?
Certainly. Thanks, Kelly. There's plenty of sources of conflict at the association. I was thinking about my time in my first condominium and appreciating that, wow, there's a lot going on here. And one of them is just finances. And we're here, Kelly and I, to defuse, kind of like bomb control people, to defuse these issues. We've got people coming at it from different points of view. There's people that figure if they've got checks in their checkbook, they've got money. And they've got people at the association that have been careful with their money since they were a child. There's people that don't know the implications of saving. They've never saved personally, so they don't know about saving for the association. And so there's got to be different perspectives, different values with respect to money, but at an association, so much of it comes into what is really appropriate for the association. And the biggest problem I see is when boards fundamentally are focusing on the wrong objective. You indicated it just a moment ago. They're looking at the wrong target, and that target is trying to minimize expenses, minimize the things the association spends money on so they can minimize homeowner contributions. Now, cost control is great. I'm all for it, but associations need money to sustain and thrive. And if you're choking the lifeblood of the association by choking the money that it needs to thrive, you're fundamentally going to have stress. And well, that's my point of view. Paige, can you launch a poll and see if this is a big deal for our listeners today?
Absolutely. Next poll. Do you experience stress due to financial scarcity? Go ahead and make your selection, please. Okay, Robert, it's looking like 70% do experience stress, while 30% do not.
Okay, good. Well, congratulations to that 30. There's a lot of people out there that I'm imagining, I can see my golf pro telling me this is how you hold your hands. If you make this slight adjustment, things will be better. Well, hopefully that 30% are the people that have made the adjustments in the past, and so it's not a source of stress at this point in time. For the 70% of you out there, let me give you a few tips. One is trying to think that there's a fantasy land that they can live in. Fantasy land only exists in Disneyland. They're trying to hold on too tight. They're focusing on tightening up the purse strings of the association, and they are dooming the association to failure, scarcity, and conflict. There's some realities in community association life. It's bad debt, delinquencies, surprises, and if you haven't increased your assessments to solve that problem, you're going to have those same problems again. So you need to make the appropriate adjustments because there isn't a fairy godmother. She doesn't exist, and trying to run the association with insufficient funds is going to sacrifice the well-being of the property, your peace of mind, and home values. Second source of conflict is inadequate reserve contributions, and so many people excuse those because they think they're for the future. Let me clarify something here. The expenses are in the future, but the contributions and the deterioration are day by day by day by day. Every day the roof gets a little older, the elevator gets a little bit older, everything deteriorates. The reserve contributions are, their purpose is to offset ongoing deterioration. They're as real as any other bill at the association. It is fundamentally unfair for owners to say, that's not my issue, and not pay their fair share for the deterioration that occurs while they own a home in the association. So the adjustment that you can make is characterize reserve contributions as a current expense, offsetting ongoing deterioration. Because if you say reserves are for the future or for a rainy day or for savings, you got an uphill battle. So characterize them as offsetting ongoing deterioration. Another problem that associations make is sacrificing, and I think Kelly mentioned it also, sacrificing ongoing maintenance. This guy here in the picture is fixing an ironwork fence that's costing over $50 a lineal foot, and he's having to do that because they failed to paint, and the paint is $6, $7, $8, $9 a lineal foot. And after he repairs it, they're still going to have to paint it. So the people who are misguided, or the board members who are leading their associations with purse strings that are too tight, are actually costing their associations more money by deferred maintenance. So in the attempt, that misguided, well-intended, but misguided attempt to not spend money actually costs more money, and in the process it lowers property values. So it has a double whammy. So don't do that. Spend the money where you need to keep the property well maintained. And if you back it up one more step, that means you need to have the assessments high enough so you can maintain the association. And you have to appreciate that my field of expertise is reserves, and reserve contributions are not a luxury. As I indicated, they are the cost of ongoing deterioration. It's as real as any other bill at the association. When people say that, well, we can't afford it, well, that's just a choice. Because if you look at the average condominium reserve contribution in this country, it's typically somewhere $70 to $100 per unit owner per month. If you do the math, that ends up being $2, $3 a day, something like that. And that's about as much as a premium coffee. Very affordable. So when someone says, I can't afford it, you have to make it very clear to them that this is one of the cheapest things you can do at the association. It saves the association money by not having deferred maintenance. It increases curb appeal, so it maximizes home values. And besides that, it's just fundamentally not a large expense. Well, in a few minutes, Kelly and I have been able to spend some time talking about what we see and the obstacles. It's like a guide going down a trail. We've been up and down this trail many, many times. We know where the dangerous spots are. We know where the obstacles are. We can hold your hand or guide you and hopefully say, try this. Drink a little more water here. Get ready, we've got an uphill climb here. Or enjoy the view, we're almost there. Lots of good things we can help you with, and we want to make sure that you appreciate that in addition to what we've been able to share with you today, we've got some additional resources. On the Association Reserves website, reservesay.com, you can see a learning center, a place for you to request a proposal if you want our help, or a place where you can join our email list if you're not currently on it. Similarly, Kelly has a great website, a deep library of resources there. You can see up at the top articles and news. His website is rhopc.com, and if you go on the news tab, you can sign up for his newsletter. Again, be part of the pipeline, be some of the people that are informed, getting those ongoing helpful tips that will minimize conflict at your association. So on behalf of Kelly and myself, we want to thank you for attending today's program. We hope that you're able to catch a few gems, things that you can do slightly differently, a few different words, a little bit different perspective, so that you can make some course corrections and bring more peace and success to your association. So at this point in time, I want to turn the microphone over to Paige, who will handle our Q&A session. Paige.
All right. Thank you so much, Robert and Kelly. As I mentioned earlier, you can ask one of our presenters a question by typing your question into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. All right, let's get going. The first question is, do you have any strategies to allow a professional manager to live in harmony in their own HOA, given that they know too much about how the HOA should be governed?
Mind control.
Yeah. That's a challenge, isn't it? The one thing I would strongly suggest not happen is that a manager in the profession really is in a tough position if they wind up governing their own association, because you're always going to be managing a competitor of yours who's the management company, And by the way, you certainly don't want to be managing your own association and on the board of your association. That's about a triple conflict. I think that if you are a lawyer or a manager who understands this area of governance and you live in the community, frankly, my suggestion is I would keep a low profile because you really can't win. Too much is going to be expected of you. They're going to want you to go on the board. If you go on the board, you can't win because any criticism you make of the manager is going to be, viewed by some as professional rivalry or jealousy. So, frankly, bluntly, I would keep a low profile. As a third of the housing stock, at least in California, is in a common interest community, the odds are that a lot of our managers are already living in homeowner associations. So I think that's the balance. Is sometimes you need to kind of keep a low profile because anything you do as a professional could wind up biting you.
Yeah, I'd just add, lay low, just like you said, Kelly, and use it as market research. See what they do well. See if you get some good ideas about the newsletter or what they promote, how they handle the budget distribution. See what they do well and pick up what good ideas you can, but otherwise lay low.
Okay, great. The next question is, we need a roof replacement and I'm not sure how to decide whether an assessment needs to be done after paying for the expense. Can you advise on that?
Kelly, let me take a stab at that one. Well, first off, look at your reserve study. We find out so often that when a board gets a roof invoice, it's $100,000, $500,000. It's usually a big number. After they pick themselves up from falling off the chair, they look at their reserve study and they realize, oh, we have $100,000 in the reserve study ready to be spent on this. And that's fantastic. That's success. As far as if you have a significant expense, if you don't have a reserve study, if you're wondering where you are, well, that's the nature of not having enough information to make a good decision. Reserve studies are there to help guide. It's like that guide that I showed you a few slides back for the trail. With a reserve study, you'll know the answer to that decision. You'll know how much you can expend from reserves, how long you have to recover until you have an asphalt or a painting or elevator expense. It's basically the plan is all there. So look to your reserve study. If you don't have one, get one. Those will answer a whole lot of questions at your association. Kelly?
Oh, I concur. I mean, a lot of associations, one of the many benefits of having a well-funded reserve account is that if for whatever reason you've got a major unanticipated expense, you can borrow from that reserve account for a year. It becomes your own private bank. Now, you've got a year to figure out a way to pay it back. But that's one of about 100 reasons why all associations should be disciplined and make sure that they prepare for that ongoing deterioration and accumulate that money so that you can handle this. It's amazing how often associations wind up at the mercy of banks because the homeowners won't vote for a special assessment and the board can't authorize more than a 5% special assessment on their own, and they can't agree to assessments more than 20% a year, so they can't make the dollars work unless they have the money in the bank to set up their strategy.
Yeah, just want to add for our listeners across the country, Kelly's articulating some California legislated limitations on boards. It may be different in different areas of the country.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, that's California specific, yes.
Okay, and the next question is, if ever there is so much hatred, distrust, and constant conflict between homeowners, some of which are on the board, is there an option of dissolving the HOA? If so, what is the process? And do you get legal involved, then put it to vote, or do you put it to vote, then get legal involved?
Well, that's definitely a legal issue. I do get asked that a lot. People write into my column probably once a month and ask me, can we just disband our association? There are some associations that may not be necessary if the associations are individual plan development lots and you're not connected by construction, you don't have common facilities, but usually the benefits of having an association, if run properly, far outweigh the burdens. So when people ask me that right away, that tells me I've got a dysfunctional association. Either they've just given up trying to do it, there's something else going on that's wrong, that's dysfunctional. But yes, if an association membership all wanted to take their association and disband it, it is possible in some cases. Most of the time it's not recommended. You're definitely going to need a real estate lawyer to work with you before you explore that beyond just the talking stage.
I would think it'd be, Kelly, just perhaps very cost effective to, like with a marriage counselor, find a consultant, find someone like Kelly who can identify what are the problems, and I bet within 5 years it can be a great place to live if they just start making one change here, one change there, making the adjustments. I bet within 5 years, is that a fair amount of time? It could be a great place.
It could even be shorter. It can even be shorter. There are very rare situations where small single-family home detached communities, for whatever reason over the years, have just basically forgotten they're an association. And they have no common facilities, and there's no desire for architectural control. Those are pretty rare. But I agree with Robert. I think that in probably 18 months to 2 years, you can transform an association into an asset. When people that view them as a burden and as an inconvenience to be dispensed with, that tells me right away that either the association is really dysfunctional at this moment so that they don't see the benefit, or they don't understand why associations are important. There's a cadre of people across the country, and in my role as CI, I've tangled with some of them where they're anti-shared ownership. Well, how does that help somebody in downtown LA who lives in a 500-unit condominium building? What exactly is the alternative to a well-running association? But yet there are people out there, and you can find them, who will advocate dispensing with associations completely. Well, it's ridiculous. That's what I talk about before, the culture needing to catch up with economic realities.
Okay, we have time for one final question, and that is, do you have tips for a new board who is replacing a board that has really neglected both maintenance and reserve studies?
My quick answer to that one is start small, start where you can, look at what you can do budget-wise and make the increases. Usually it needs to happen on the income side, so that may tie your hands in the first year. Often a board comes in and the budget has already been set, the assessments have already been set, so they will have to spend their first year, I would imagine, doing a lot of salesmanship, politicking, saying that this is the state of the association, these are the needs of the association, these are our assessments, and we anticipate that they'll need to go up by X amount so we can do the parking lot, we can resurface the pool, we can change the clubhouse carpet, we can re-roof building 2, all that kind of stuff. And it may take some time. It may take a couple of election cycles, but it's a very doable project. You just need to screw up your courage, tighten your belt, and say, here we go. And congratulations to you, new board. You got elected because there were enough people dissatisfied to elect you. So do what you can, do your job. Don't expect immediate results, but it may take a couple of election cycles and a couple of budget cycles, but the profitability is there for associations that can turn themselves around. The real estate community starts to see and they say, wow, these are no longer depressed condominiums. This is a nice place to live. And within just a few short years, it can become a wonderful place to live. It takes the right budget, the right courageous board members, but it can be done.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Robert just said. An association board that has been not putting money in reserves and is not properly disclosing the reserve study or even hiring a reserve study, they're lying to the community. They're not telling them the truth. So when the homeowners finally wake up and get a new board that's willing to deal with the economic truth, that things are deteriorating and we need to set money aside and we're very much behind, the truth teller board is going to have to do a lot of communicating with the members and just tell them, look, here's the reality, here's where we're supposed to be, and here's where we actually are. And that may take some difficult decisions for all the homeowners as they try to catch up. But you can't continue to lie to yourselves and to your community by not acknowledging the ongoing deterioration of the components. And that's why we have people like Association Reserves to make sure that our members are being told the truth and that home buyers who are looking at homes in that community can have confidence that the appraiser's value is legitimate, because as we all know, real estate appraisers do not consider the reserve account as part of their evaluation of a condominium. They're only looking at so-called comps. So that's why we're here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robert and Kelly. That concludes our webinar. If anyone is interested in a recorded version of this or any other webinar, you can search for it on YouTube or find it on the Association